Hi, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of Christ and Critique podcast, Philosophy and its Other C. As always, I'm here with my friend and collaborator, Frank Ruda. We are very happy to welcome you today with a very exciting guest whom I will introduce in just a minute. But before doing that, allow me to mention just a few things. The new issue of Christ and Critique journal is completed and is in production. We hope it will be published very, very soon. It is devoted to the work of Slavoj Žižek. We also expect another issue to be out by the end of this year. We would really appreciate if you can subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. If you like the work that we do both with the journal as well as with the podcast, please consider supporting us at our Patreon page. You can find all the links in the bio. And now it is time to introduce our guest for today. Frank and I are very excited to welcome Todd McGowan to the new episode of Crisis and Critique. Todd McGowan teaches film and theory in the English department at the University of Vermont. He's a philosopher, film scholar, and a Lacanian theorist. His PhD, which he received from the Ohio State University, was titled "The Empty Subject, the New Canon, and the Politics of Existence." Todd has written widely on a wide range of topics, including Lacanian and Freudian psychoanalysis, film theory, and various filmmakers, Hegel and Marx, comedy, and so on. He has written many books and also edited many books and written many papers and essays. So I will limit myself to mentioning only some of his books. Pure Access, published in 2024 by Columbia University Press. Embracing Alienation, Why We Shouldn't Try to Find Ourselves, 2024 Repeater Books. Universality and Identity Politics, 2020 Columbia University Press. The Racist Fantasy, Unconscious Roots of Hatred, 2022 Bloomsbury. Emancipation After Hegel, Achieving a Contradictionary Revolution, 2019 Columbia University Press. Only a Joke Can Save Us, A Theory of Comedy, in 2017 with Northwestern University Press. Capitalism and Desire, The Psychotic Cost of Free Markets, 2016 by Columbia University Press. The Fictional Christopher Nolan, 2012 by University of Texas Press. And The Impossible David Lynch, 2007 by Columbia University Press. Also, he has a new book, The Cambridge Companion to Jacques Lacan, which will come out next month, if we checked it correctly, with Cambridge University Press, and we hope to talk about it during our conversation later. Todd is also the editor of the book series titled Film Theory in Practice with Bloomsbury, and together with Slavoj Žižek and Adrian Johnston, he edits a book series called Diaresis with Northern University Press. In addition, he is a co-host of Why Theory podcast with Ryan Angley. Todd, thank you so much for being here with us today and taking your time. Now I pass on to Frank to start off our conversation.
So let me reiterate, we're immensely grateful for you taking out the time of your schedule and life to do this with us. And we thought one way to begin our conversation would be to talk about your contribution to the new issue of Crisis and Critique, which will be devoted to the work of Slavoj. He himself contributes to the issue. We have around, 20 essays, and yours makes a very distinct contribution. The article of your piece is called Perversion or Provocation, Slavoj Žižek's Political Style. The first sentence reads, Slavoj Žižek is not a pervert. A bit later, you emphasize that perversion should not be confused with provocation, and the two need to be distinguished, even though they might be difficult to decipher. Could you say a bit more of how does one distinguish perversion and provocation? Why is, let's say, the guide to Žižek not the guide run by a provocateur, but it's the guide run by a provocateur and not by a pervert?
Yes, thanks, Frank, and thanks to both of you for inviting me and for that generous introduction. I should say that I've passed on the the Bloomsbury film theory series onto someone else, to Ryan Engley. And Slavoj Adrian and I were fired by Northwestern from that other series. So just to set the record straight. But yeah, so I tell you, that first line is actually the reason why I wrote the essay. So I wanted to say that. And it derived from a conversation I had with Slavoj when I said, well, why did you call those films that made it? I think he's more famous for those perverts' guides to ideology and cinema than for anything else, probably. And I said, why did you call them perverts' guides? You're opposed to perversion. And he said, it wasn't my idea. It was Sophie Fine's idea. She thought it would be better. And so I thought, well, if those are the things he's most known for, then it's important to say he's not a pervert, because, and then this is my way of answering your question. I think the fundamental difference between provocation, and maybe that's the wrong word, because I think provocateur has a implication that maybe is not great. And so I like provocation as a noun, but the term for the person is, I think, a little, just because the agent provocateur is someone who's trying to stir up trouble for the other side. But nonetheless, that's what I guess we're stuck with. And I think the difference for me is that the pervert is trying to, I'm going to be a little jargony, but the pervert's trying to shore up the function of the big other. The big other seems, the social authority seems wobbly. The pervert transgresses the law, whatever the particular law the pervert wants to transgress, in order to allow the big other to get off, to allow the authority to get off on the transgression. So it's about fueling or facilitating the other's substantiality, the other's enjoyment. And I think that's why I think it has because it's so tied to transgression, it has the feeling of being really radical. And I think if you talk to a pervert and I think Freud was really good. He said, when we use the term pervert, it's not a denigrating term. It's just a term of analysis. So, that's how I take it too. But when we talk to the pervert, they think that they're transgressive. They think that they're doing something that's really challenging the way things are, the ruling ideology, whatever. And I think the problem is that it's the kind of, and I think you can look sometimes at different political movements. Like I was thinking about, we just had a no monarchs or no kings movement in the US. And I think it's an interesting question. Was that a provocation, or was it a perverse trying to, are we trying to actually, like, Trump had a sad parade, it rained, it was kind of sad. But at least he had this whole no kings thing. And maybe that was allowing some kind of perverse enjoyment on the part of them, and then in order to trigger him, maybe. But provocation, I think what's different about it is that it causes the gap in the other, the gap in the figure of authority to become evident. And I think that's what really aligns it with political radicality. And I think that's what all of Slavoj's work is trying to do, which is why I linked it. That's why I came up with that distinction and then talked about it in terms of him, because I think he is constantly trying to provoke, even pieties on the left, as both of you know as well as I do, which gets him in a lot of trouble. But it's for the sake not of just transgressing for the sake of transgressing and arousing, but for the sake of making clear that there is no substantial other that exists. So that's basically how I see that divide working.
Can I just quickly erase one additional point? Do you think provocation helps with perversion? Because perversion is very difficult to break.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Like, because I think Freud thought the pervert is basically would not willingly go into analysis, right? Like, that's the problem. And Frank, I never thought of it. It's a kind of a great idea, right? Like that what you maybe could do is shift the pervert over to provocation as a way to get out of the perversion. So yeah, I really like that. It's interesting because provocation is not a Freudian, it's not a psychoanalytic term. But I do think that because I think that the neurotic position is very unappealing to the pervert. And so it's very difficult to get them into that neurotic place where they could undergo some kind of way to get out of their perversion. So yeah, maybe provocation would do that. That's a great question. I really like that. Yeah, thanks.
You wrote a book called Only a Joke Can Save Us, a theory of comedy. You argue that comedy brings together lack and excess in order to show that we cannot have one without the other. And at the same time, I'm quoting, the failure to take comedy seriously is the most damaging attitude to take towards it. And yet this attitude is almost ubiquitous. The end of quote. Unlike extreme experiences, comedy does not provoke reflection. As you write, I'm quoting again, part of the enjoyment of comedy, however, involves giving oneself over to the immediacy of the experience. The end of quote. In the essay that you wrote for the journal, which you just discussed, you have a section on the jokes. Your thesis seems to be that Zizek uses jokes in his work to reveal the lack in the big other. Jokes challenge or undermine the authority of the figure, the big other. In this sense, are the jokes a provocation rather than a perversion? And as a side note, did you see the news that Slavoj's book has been banned in Russia, including his Zizek's jokes?
Right, which isn't even really his book. It's some of the collection of jokes from his. Yeah, I did see that note. And in fact, I wrote a note to him and he said, he's like, you're the 100th person who's told me my books have been banned in Russia. So I thought I sent him a note right away, right after I found out. But clearly everybody wanted to tell him that. And I think I just thought that was great news. I also thought it was nice that also the books of Murakami, which I thought was very odd, like why would Murakami's books be banned? But I just said to Slavoj, you're in really good company if you're along with Murakami. But yeah, I think that I'm really glad. That's my favorite book, I have to say. So my mom tried to read every book that I wrote. And when I wrote that book on comedy, she said to me, you finally wrote a good book. And so I thought that was a really nice, I mean, it was a little mean, but nice at the same time. But I think Slavoj's jokes, the one I immediately thought, so he tells that coffee without cream and the horseshoe, all these jokes, so many. In fact, he told the coffee without cream joke at the last LAC conference, and all those people there had heard him speak several times. And so there wasn't even a chuckle in the audience. And I thought that was what was funny, was that everybody had heard the joke 100 times. So at a certain point, you don't laugh anymore. But the one I think is the one that actually occasions, this parody song of him, I think that's a Slovenian guy that did it, and it's called Cut the Balls, right? And it's about this joke about the guy whose wife is being brutally raped, but he didn't hold his balls up, and so he dusted the balls. And I think, and rather than cutting them off, and I think that idea of dust, that joke about dust the balls is a perfect provocation kind of joke, because it did offend people. People were offended by it because they thought, I don't know, it was anti-feminist. There's all kinds of critiques of it. But I also think that what it really got to, and this is what I think the difference between provocation and perversion is, it really got to the way in which people that thought they were opposing figures of authority were actually, unbeknownst to themselves, facilitating their functioning, right? And that's what dusting the balls for Slavoj is. And so I think that his jokes, maybe some miss and some become perverse, but I think for the most part, they do a great job of being provocations. And the fact that some people are bothered by them is, I think, that part is key to their function. It's interesting that you brought up the Zizek jokes books, because I think that you can't. I haven't looked at that book, but because I know all the jokes already, so I don't need to look at it. But I almost think it can't work, because one of the things that his jokes are always performing a function within the text and within the argument. And so I feel like he doesn't just tell jokes that are for one thing, he's never made up a joke in his life. I think we should be very clear about us. We're three that really love him, but he all his jokes are taken and stolen. So that is just I just want to make that clear to everyone. And I liked Alenka in one of her recent books says, the joke that I first brought to prominence about the coffee without cream, and it was her way of saying, wait a minute, okay, I first brought up this joke, and then Slavoj has taken it. But I think they all fit within a certain logic, and they all make a point. And I think that's why I think there are obviously perverse jokes that are just made to transgress a certain kind of norm. In fact, I think that's most comedians, I think, function in that way. Like they're part of what we're laughing at is their perversion, especially contemporary comedians. I was thinking of like who's a great provocateur comedian. I was thinking of he's dead, George Carlin. Seemed like he always was able to say the thing that opened up this space within the other. Whereas I think today it's more of perverse things. But I think Slavoj's, I can't think of a joke of his that's perverse. I think they're always provocations.
I like that a lot because, I mean, one way in which I think Slavoj once responded ages ago when he was in LA with Badiou to a question what the function of his jokes are, was he was basically saying they're similar to what they are in Freud, my formalizations.
Yeah.
Right. They're formalizations of certain dynamics in how, I don't know, subjectivity works, how and hence they're Lacanian in spirit, or Freudian Lacanian in spirit. Yep. I really like the idea of how does one formalize the exhaustion of a joke, or how does one formalize, one could say, the impasse of a formalization in this. In the sense that you just no one laughed and that was the joke.
That was the joke, right. I mean, and then like what's the point at which that happens, right? Like that is an interesting formal question, I think.
Absolutely. And I think this has something to do with your introduction to Jacques Lacan, which is about to come out, because introducing might have something to do with formalizing in the right way. And because we don't know the book, but we thought, I mean, it's the Cambridge introduction to Jacques Lacan that you will have written now. How do you introduce this thinker, which is so cliché-ically being called notoriously difficult? That one does not even know if he is that difficult. Or,
I know that's a great
or
point.
if that is already exhausted.
So I never would have written a book with Cambridge. Like that's not my I even said to them, are you sure you want me to do it? But my friend Mari Rudy asked me to co-write it with her. And then before I had written my half, and then she sadly died. And then I was stuck with my half, and the editor said, well, do you want to finish the other half, or do you want to just let it go? And I thought, well, I have my half, I might as well finish it. So the very fact that it came about was very strange. But then it's a far different book than it would have been if she had written it. For one thing, it does not treat Lacan. This is the couple. So the point about formalization is really accurate. So I treat Lacan purely as a philosopher. So there is no discussion of Lacan as a psychoanalyst. And I think that certain people think that that's, I don't know, maybe it's too strong to say sinful, but certainly wrong. Certainly just you've missed the boat. I mean, I hear people all the time say, Lacan's not a theorist, he's a psychoanalyst. And okay, but my point on that all, and you can't take Lacan out of the clinic. My point always to them is, well, then you have to play it both ways. Then you can't take this stuff that's outside, that's from philosophy. Lacan brings that into the clinic, so you have to rule all that out from the. So I just don't think you can have it. You can't just have it one way. So that's, but the difficulty thing is real. And one of the things I say is, I think we should just dismiss the écrits altogether. I just don't think you should even look at them if you're trying to understand Lacan. Just worthless, because they're just intentionally obfuscatory, and basically, if you don't already understand his thought from the seminars, they're inaccessible. And then the other thing I try to do is I try to say there's a struggle for Lacan's heart between Kant and Hegel. And there are periods where Kant wins most of the time. And then there are these brief glimpses where Hegel wins. And so and it's also, you can kind of see it in the external reception by different people whose side they're on. And one of the claims I make is Joan Kopchak is clearly on the Kantian side. And so the periods that she is drawn to, like Seminar 20, say, that's a really Kantian moment in Lacan's thought. And then Slavoj obviously would be the more Hegelian thinker. So that's one of the things that I do in it. And I really am really tied to this periodization of his work, that there are for sure 3 distinct periods, and we can align them with Kant and then Hegel and then Kant. And I think that's a really, to me, it just gave me a way to think about him in a way I never had before, because I think too many people just throw it all together into a mix and say this is all Lacan's thought. And what I looking at it, what I discovered was, no, actually, there's just things that are incompatible. Like you can't bring together certain ideas for discourses with some idea from the early Lacan. It just doesn't. There are things that are just theoretically incompatible. So I found that kind of interesting. I got to put in a lot of Lacan jokes. So that was fun. It was okay. It was fun to write, I guess. I mean, I wouldn't have done it if Mari hadn't asked me. And so it wasn't a passion project of mine. So, but I tried to make it as much something that I liked as much as I could. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I kind of my fear is that Hillary told me not to say this, so I'm going to say it because I'm perverse. And my fear is that this will be the book everyone's like, oh, that he finally wrote a good book. This is finally, and that's my real fear. That because Agon introduced me as Lacan. I don't really feel Lacanian, so I feel a little resistant to that label. I just don't like him that much personally either. And so that puts me, whereas Freud and Hegel, I would stand by them anytime. So I don't know. So we'll see what happens. I don't know. Sorry, that's a bad answer. But
No. This was thank you so much for this. But let's move to another question. In some of your recent books, including Pure Access, Racist Fantasy, and Embracing Alienation, you talk about non-belonging. Part of your thesis runs as follows: the subject is, in its universality, exists as non-belonging. The subject emerges through a sense of marking the place of absence. For example, you say, I'm quoting, a particular community's identity is constituted through what it is not. So I am an X because I am not an Z. Quoting again, this act of creating a position of non-belonging is a prerequisite for all identity within a community. I belong through those who don't, the end of quote. In other words, no particular community can survive without this figure of non-belonging that threatens that particular identity. As you argue, unlike belonging, non-belonging is universal. Furthermore, for you, non-belonging is not an abstraction imposed on our politics, but it is the opposite. It is a political act already at play. In what sense non-belonging is conceivable as a political act?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I really have become more and more invested in this idea of non-belonging. And in fact, I just was talking to a press about a book called Universal Non-Belonging, which kind of would bring together all this stuff, because you're right, it's kind of scattered about in these different books. And here's what I would say to that. I was thinking of this. I've been thinking about this exact issue for quite a while, and I always, there's an example I'm always drawn to for historically, and I think that it really explains it better than anyone. And I hope it's true, but it comes from C.L.R. James in The Black Jacobins. And he talks about the way in which so just for people that don't know the Haitian slaves revolted Saint-Domingue, they weren't yet Haiti. They revolted in France. The Jacobins also, they agreed we need to free the slaves. So that's a very important point that often gets elided, because the Jacobins get thought of as these horrible people, but they actually freed the slaves. So they were free, and then Napoleon comes to power in 1800. He re-enslaves Saint-Domingue, Haiti, and he sends the French troops. And then there was this encounter. This is again described by C.L.R. James. This encounter in Haiti between the Haitian revolutionaries sang back to the French troops as they heard the songs coming up. They sang La Marseillaise, and I was thinking, it's such a great moment because La Marseillaise, if you look at the lyrics, it's the ultimate song of belonging, right? Because I don't know if you remember, the final things are like, our fields are going to be watered with the blood of the impure blood of the enemy, right? Like it's a so you think, like, you watch Casablanca and you're like, oh, it's a great anti-Nazi song. It's like, this is great. And I love La Marseillaise as a revolutionary song, but it's kind of terrible. It's a real song about we belong, we French belong, and this other blood is impure. And so I love the idea that the Haitians, because their blood would obviously be the impure blood, so that they sang back to the French this French song which was obviously a revolutionary song too. But this song of belonging, and they said, look, but basically by singing that back to them, they were saying, even this thing that's the most French we're part of that. Like we share in that, right? And so I think that's, to me, it's one of these great, incredible gestures that shows the way in which, and I'm tempted to say every political act touches on this moment of non-belonging, or it's not really a political act. Like, it has to have that moment of this a universal, there's some kind of universal appeal, and a universal appeal to the figure and that's why at the center of most political movements is a certain figure. Like, it can be like Black Lives Matter, it could be George Floyd being stopped on by, like, that's a figure of non-belonging, and that becomes this thing that mobilizes the entire movement. It can be, right, in Iran, like, what's the name? Woman, Freedom, Life, I think. I don't know if that's the right order, but right, like that. And there's the image of the woman being killed for not wearing the perfect thing, right? And I think that's like I can't think of a political movement in the sense that I understand politics that doesn't have that, some figurization of that non-belonging attached to it. So again, that's my favorite example, is the Haitian one, just because of the way it reverses the song in such a beautiful way. And again, I think the lyrics are so disturbing. I mean, they're worse. I mean, every national anthem has disturbing lyrics, right? But Americans are notoriously, at least leftist Americans, notoriously feel terrible about the Star Spangled Banner. They're like, this is but the French should arguably feel worse. It's worse. I mean, it's really worse. Like, the enemy's like cutting the throats of our children. What do we gotta? Let's have their blood. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty bad. So anyway, that's it.
Well, I'm German, so I'm not sure I should
I
speak
know,
to
right? Well, you have Deutschland über alles. So
well, no longer, right? We had that once.
No, I know.
I know. But anyhow, there seems to be a clear link between constitutive non-belonging and alienation.
Yeah.
Right. Because in your 2020 before book Embracing Alienation, you make quite clear that alienation needs to fulfill a different function than it classically fulfilled in, let's say, critical and Marxist theory. The latter, I mean, always smelling of a certain form of humanism, ultimately, right? Of substantialism, of, I mean, to use a term that is quite prominent these days in philosophy, life formalism, maybe one could say, right? I mean, there is something that is really alienation might be an inbuilt function to any life form, but what is alienated is in itself, exists in itself before alienation. And you seem to make the point that alienation is constitutive insofar as it precedes existence proper. And therein, maybe, I mean, there's this one line that I always liked in the early Marx. I know Slavoj hates the early Marx, but there is one line which is really great in the early Marx, and that's in the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, where he actually says, well, without the absolute loss of man, we don't even understand what the proletariat is. I mean, I'm reformulating. Why is that? Because that is internationalism embodied. That is mankind embodied. Mankind is the loss of man. Maybe I'm overemphasizing this, but this seems to be, to my mind, very close to the point that you're making. But the question we wanted to raise is that, and in what precise sense does that make alienation key to emancipation itself? So not simply to a proper understanding of ourselves, but even to a form of emancipatory practice.
Right. Yeah, I've obviously read the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, but I didn't have that line in mind. It's real. I'm going to have to go back and look at it. That's pretty great. So yeah, I think that there is consonance between that and what I'm saying for sure. So I think there's a kind of something unfortunate about the way that we think of alienation as we're alienated from something, right? And I think I'm trying to understand the term, and I wonder if you think that the German Entfremdung is better because it's like the Fremd is within, and I think that's how I want to understand alienation. That it's not alienation from something. It's a grasp that the alien is inside, right? And so I think for me that's that, and then that if you understand it that way, then it's not a fall, obviously, from something else, which is key. And then I guess for me, that an oppressive situation or an ideological situation is one in which we are, and this book was much more inspired by Hegel than by psychoanalysis, right? The Alienation book, because I think for Hegel that I read this, he repeats at least 5 times in the preface to Phenomenology, substance is subject, right? And I think that's his way of saying what I'm saying, that there's something in that how ideology functions or how oppression functions is it makes itself seem substantial. It makes itself seem like it has no crack. It's undivided. It's not, and everybody knows this. The greatest way to when an authority becomes weakened is when we see that it's a subject and not just a substantial figure of authority, right? Like the teacher farts in front of us, and we're all like they're just a subject, and then that all of a sudden their authority is impugned in some way. So I think that's what and then I guess one of the, and here I think this is the most point at which this is sort of contra the early economic and philosophic manuscripts version of Marx, is that I think that the problem with capitalism, as I see it, is that it substantializes us and identifies us with a certain symbolic identity rather than alienating us. And so that's why I see emancipation as engaging with, embracing in some way alienation, because again, it's this substance subject relationship that we're pushed to think of ourselves as substantial, and then emancipation would be seeing the way in which that substance is subject, not just ourselves, but obviously also the figures of authority that are prevailing. So yeah, but yeah, I don't know about the relationship to Marx would be. I mean, I think it's more true about the way Marx was disseminated than about Marx himself, right? Like, I think that for sure, this in the 20th century, that alienation became this thing to fight against, right? So I think Marx himself would be a more interesting question. Yeah.
Let's follow up a little bit on this, because in the same book you write basically what you just said. Alienation occurs, but it doesn't alienate us from what we once really were. Instead, alienation is primary. We are alienated in our subjectivity, and alienation persists until our death, the end of quote. So basically, only death can save us from it. We are alienated both from ourselves as well as from the others. We are nothing but our alienation, so to speak. In its basic elementary, it is a basic and elementary fact of our existence. But in this sense, alienation seems to be a condition for freedom, right? Methodologically, this resonates with your Hegel book, in which you show that the contradiction is at the core of Hegel's work, and we should learn to live with it, accept it, embrace it. So what we're trying to ask you is the concept of alienation in your work a development of Hegelian concept of contradiction?
Yeah. Like, is every book that I write just a different way of saying the same thing? Is that the question? That's a good question. The answer is yes. Yeah, it's exactly true. Here's what I would say the difference is. I think for Hegel, contradiction is ubiquitous, right? Like, there's no entity that escapes for him contradiction. It has an ontological status. And I think alienation, I'm looking outside, I see a fir tree. It's not alienated in the way. So I think that's the only thing I would say, that alienation is much more tied to subjectivity in a way that contradiction is not. But or I think one could say it this way, that alienation is in a way the when you grasp your own and integrate your own contradiction into your being as an entity, that's what it means to be alienated. So I think that there is a clear, I don't think they're synonyms, but I think there's a clear relationship from the one to the other, for sure. And yeah, I again, like, I'm tempted to say that embracing alienation is kind of a popular version of the Hegel book, right? Because I couldn't, Hegel's not exactly, it's hard, right? So I mean, my version is to simplify everything. Someone wrote me a thing. It was very mean, but it was accurate. They said the point of dialectics and psychoanalysis to introduce a cut, and so it has to be difficult, and you make everything simple and easy. So you're like the enemy. And I said, okay, fair enough, but don't email me anymore. That hurts my feelings. But yeah, I think it's just a way of seeing the way in which that it's the term for the way in which contradiction is internalized by subjectivity. So that's what I would say.
I mean, just endorsing the simplification. To simplify the right way is one of the greatest powers, right? I mean, Hegel himself, I think, says in the philosophy of history that thought is the greatest epitomator and needs to be it, right? Because it needs to select the things out of context that make the hallmark that are the hallmark, that are the unitary traits, so to speak, of an
Yeah,
ego.
Frank, it's really interesting you said that, because I was thinking of that line from the preface to Phenomenology, right, where he says, the understanding is this absolute power. And what is it the power to do? It's to pick things out, right? It's to say this and not that, right? And I think in order to have what's so fascinating, you're like, why would Hegel say the understanding is the ultimate power or absolute power? Because he's, in a way, he's a critic of the understanding from A to Z, but it's because I think it's for the reason you say, because before you pick things out, you cannot make the dialectical connection between them. So reason can only come after understanding in Hegel's way of thinking. So yeah, I thought that's why I thought, okay, it's an accurate critique, but I just there's nothing I could do. Plus the other thing is I have to try to make it comprehensible to myself. So that's the other thing. And,
therefore, can we ask you about how you make comprehensible to yourself and to us the link between contradiction and emancipation? Because it seems, I mean, your point that we just established is they need to be thought of together. So emancipation is not simply the overcoming of contradiction. And that is what distinguishes this understanding of emancipation from a sort of naive understanding, or of a different understanding. Now, if that does and cannot simply mean that that emancipation now is coming to terms with contradiction, accepting contradiction, but needs to imply a different way to relate to that very contradiction that it accepts. Yeah. And thereby changes the status of contradiction. How does that work? I mean, because, right, I mean, a total misconstruction would be, yes, of course, there's contradiction. That's just what it is. What can we do? But that's exactly not what you're saying.
It's exactly not what I'm saying, right? And I think, isn't it because I would just say it is the capitalist system that is constantly saying we can overcome contradiction. So anyone that says, oh, what you're arguing is just accept capitalism and its contradictions. No, the point is capitalism is bent upon overcoming. Like, if you do not believe that contradiction can be overcome, you cannot function as a capitalist subject, right? Like that is, it's not a belief that's subjective among capitalists. It is objectively written into the structure of capital. So that's crucial. So what I would say is, to embrace contradiction, to reconcile ourselves to I think that the noun that Hegel uses is Versöhnung, like the reconciliation with contradiction is I think means that you can't just say, oh, this is how things are, but instead it means pushing the contradiction further. And I think that's what Hegel does throughout his philosophy. He doesn't just say, well, oh, there's a contradiction in being and nothing, and so let's just stop there. That's fine. No, because his point is that contradiction is it's so easily found and easily dealt with that we can then find a contradiction that's more, the term I use, what is maybe not great, but is more intractable, more difficult to deal with. And so I think that I mean, maybe it's something like some notion of permanent revolution, but some kind of idea that you can't find. You can't. It's not just. It's certainly the opposite of accepting how things are, because I think accepting how things are means accepting this world in which that contradiction is, for lack of a better word, repressed. right? So that's that. I think it's that would be in a certain way the opposite of what I'm saying. Yeah.
We would like to ask you about your relation to Marx. So, what is your relation with to the critique of political economy? We know that you are critical of Marx, critic from a Hegelian standpoint. Marx tries to resolve the contradiction of capitalism and its excesses. Could we say that for you, the catastrophic failure of socialism is linked to its attempts to solve or reconcile, etc., all the contradictions in and of socialism? Relatedly, do you see anything both in Marx and in Marxist tradition that today is still worth defending or salvaging?
Yeah, I think you guys are a little more Marxist than me, so maybe we could get into a little kind of a tussle. But I think, yeah, I do think that, I mean, this is a basic thesis of emancipation after Hegel. The part of it, one of the last chapters, is that, yeah, that basically, if your philosophy is about the overcoming of contradiction, and I think it's hard to read a Marxian politics that isn't structured that way. I mean, I know there are certain people that want to resist that, but it seems to me like that's not unfair to a Marxian conception of politics. And if that, then I think that seems problematic to me. That seems like that does lead to a certain kinds of political catastrophes, political disasters. The other question, what is salvageable about Marx? I think, and you're right that I see myself as a Hegelian, but Hegel has no real theory of it. I mean, Frank, you've said some really good things about in Hegel's Rabble about the way that he does see the necessity of the rabble in the structure of capitalism. Sure, but I think I think we would all three agree he doesn't really have a theory of he just doesn't have it. He was born too soon to really have, and in the wrong place to have a real proper theory of how capitalism works. So I think that Marx's bringing of a dialectical analysis to political economy is not only still vital, I think it's in a certain way still unequaled. Like I still think I think that still has to be, I haven't seen, I read, I don't, because hopefully I don't have to read them anymore, but because I've written these books on capitalism, I read a lot of these contemporary economists, and it's really a tedious exercise. But I haven't read one theory that I'm like, oh, clearly Marx just missed the boat totally on the formation of value. For one thing, it's fascinating. I was once talking to an economist here at the University of Vermont, and this person said to me, we don't even. I said, well, what's the dominant theory of value among you guys? This person says to me, well, we don't need a theory of value anymore. I said, well, that's nice. I said, maybe the theory of value needs you, right? Like so I don't, that just made me think there's not really a challenge to the way that Marx understands value. And then my book, Pure Excess, is, I think, someone said to me, that's your most it's interesting, it seems to be my least successful book, but that's a whole other question. But it's my most Marxist one, right? It's just basically saying, how can we extend the notion of surplus value to include the way the value of a commodity works for the consumer, and the way that the idea of surplus is not just economic, but it's also psychic, right? And so it's just a pure, I think, extension of Marx's notion of surplus value, which I think, very interestingly, Jacques Lacan in Seminar 16, From an Other to the Other, other big other to little other, that he started to do it. It's really a fascinating seminar because he starts to say, oh, there's this surplus enjoyment. We could get that really what surplus value. And then he says, let's talk about Pascal for a while. And then he basically just stops talking about it. So to me, it's one of the saddest moments in Lacan's career, because there was this moment where he could have really developed a kind of psychic political economy, and then he just didn't do it. But that's a point where I think, God, Marx is just incredibly still resonant and still valuable. So, but I would like to hear how I'm wrong. I mean, my main critique of Marx is political, not economic. So that's, but I think you again, I think you guys are a little more sympathetic on that front. So I'd like to hear how I'm wrong, because I have a lot of respect for both of you, and I'm always open to be corrected by the right people. So.
I am certainly not in a position of correcting anyone, but I would really be interested. I mean, so somehow the history of Marxism is the history that's what Zizek has argued over and over again of certain theoretical betrayals, right?
Yeah.
So Lenin betrayals Marx. Which does not mean he gives up everything, but it means it's more than just an application. It means that one needs to rethink the very fundamentals of the principles of the system that seems Marxism. And we could say, well, Marx says he was never a Marxist,
right,
famously. And maybe that's similar to that. And maybe then with Lenin and the aftermath, except Maoism, that's a more difficult case, something gets stuck, right? I mean, because then Stalinism reifies Leninism. So maybe Marxism was always that theory of the betrayal of a dogmatism. I mean, Lenin formulates the theory of a principles, right? Principle compromise, and almost that sounds sometimes like one harshly insists on one can only. I mean, that's his formula. One can only stay faithful to Marx and the revolution under certain conditions, right? And these conditions need to be historically specified. And he begins stating the revolution basically saying everyone is a Marxist. Everyone. It's just that's fine. That's the easy way out. This is why Marxism became a signifier of I don't know, a regression and disorientation and so forth in itself.
Right, and also left-wing communism and infantile disorder is really like combined with what you're saying.
So in this sense, maybe one can mobilize exactly what you're saying in a very Marxian spirit, without saying that Marx is right over Hegel, but that's the wrong kind of question, maybe, in these kind of situations. But maybe to see in which way, and just responding to your point right now, why, I don't know, a value theory based Marxism nowadays really has to come to terms why maybe there is a move back to the rebel from the move to the proletariat in the first place. So what if, right, we have to deal with different forms of the excluded, that, right? So I think that's Zizek's endorsement of Jameson's idea of the unemployed being so absolutely crucial for any form of maintenance and reproduction of contemporary political economy.
And more so, I think. Don't you that has to be true? I mean, I think that's going to be exacerbated much more.
And in this sense, capitalism is, however weird this sounds, internally regressive in its production, or in its regressive with regard to its philosophy, historical, its conceptual historical side. So it brings back slavery, it brings back the revel, it brings back the unorganized worker, it brings back all those.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting? It's such a great point by you, and it isn't interesting that the no one talks anymore about the way there's this. It's a point Milton Friedman makes in Capitalism and Freedom, right? That the political the political emancipation follows from capitalist economy, right? Just like from like just as B follows from A, the political freedom follows from the economic. And no one says that anymore. Not even the most rabid defenders of capitalism think, oh, I mean, for one thing, you can't look at China and say, yeah, it seems very clear there, but I think it's clear around the world. So yeah, I think it's a great point.
So is this what this seems to be doing something to the general link between value production and desire, which has been, as you highlighted beforehand, absolutely crucial for you, right? And it's something that already just like is part of your very early work, because capitalist production necessitates the creation of certain desires, but it creates certain obstacles at the same time and a certain enjoyment of these obstacles.
Right.
So there is no, and that would be the step beyond classical, maybe the classical critique of political economy, as you highlighted. What does this dynamic, maybe a dynamic that makes us enjoy the limits of our desires, so what we can't get, but also the regressions, right? That's the point we just made.
I think it's really true. Yeah, I think it's really true what you just said, that on the one hand, the way, I mean, that's what I think is ironic or even paradoxical about capitalism, is that it is a promise of plenitude, but the enjoyment that it offers is always in the obstacles that it erects. So it's always, and maybe this is true of every system, but this is just how it works within capitalism, that the way that it structures our enjoyment is not the way in which its own logic functions, and the way that its own promise is written out for people. So I think that's really, really important. But I also think that I've always been so taken by the line from the Communist Manifesto, he's talking about what bourgeois society does, and he says, you know, all the famous "all is solid melts into air," and all the values are raised. And I think the nowhere is that more true than in the case of identity and traditional identity. And so I think that there's this kind of, and in this sense, I think the really regressive or reactionary times that we're living in are completely linked to this ubiquity of the logic of capital over everything, right? Like no one, when I was a kid, maybe no one escaped from it, but part of your time wasn't spent in that logic, right? It was spent doing something else, or even my parents, like they had other, it wasn't completely a preoccupation. And now I think it's the complete preoccupation of everyone. So your brand, your whatever you're doing, and I think that in response, that forces you to confront this absolute vacuity, this total emptiness of any identity, in any kind of traditional identity. And then in response, your people seek out the reactionary figure who promises identity, who says, look, I can give you, I mean, that's Trump just spells it out. Make America great. I can give you this sense of identity that you feel like has been lost. And I think that's Erdogan, you know, Modi, you can just go right down the line, I think. Milei in Argentina. Like, I think that's always the appeal, is some kind of just return to certain identity. And that seems to me a direct response to this capitalist, this ubiquity of this capitalist logic in which all that's solid melts into air, and there's no sense of any kind of tradition or any sense of identity anymore. So I'm not lamenting that loss, but I'm just saying I think that when that emptiness gets, that people want to fill it in, and what they fill it in with is what you're calling this regressive tendency, for sure. And it's such a source of enjoyment, don't you think? Like that, it becomes just the idea that just these, for instance, like these in the U.S., these raids by ICE where they take people off, they beat the shit out of them and take them to. I just think the way, even the people that are, this is the thing, of course, this is I think this is, I think it's too obvious to even say. Even the people that are horrified by it are getting off on it, right? Like that's the thing. I think that's the thing. Like they're like, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessively watching these YouTube things about these terrible terrors that are going on. So it's having a libidinal satisfaction for me, who's totally opposed to it. So I think that's where you get this regressive kind of enjoyment that's really effective in our contemporary capitalist epoch. So
let's stick to enjoyment for for a brief second. You're right. Political struggles take place to determine what form of enjoyment will predominate. So your position is that once we start to talk about what is at stake with enjoyment, analyzing and understanding politics will become much easier from that standpoint or from that perspective. Would it be correct to claim that politics is not defined by the set of ideas, ideologies, and so forth, but with regard to the form of enjoyment that is hegemonic? A crucial clarification should be added here. We think enjoyment is not just merely a pleasure, but it is something that goes beyond pleasure. And to use the title of your last book, it is an experience of pure access, so to speak. Additionally, you argue that life without enjoyment would be so impotent that dramatically one would not even take the courage to commit suicide. Our question would thus be, what constitutes the enjoyment of the left and the right today? Why are we so imprisoned by our ways of enjoying?
Yeah. I do think it's true that every political struggle is an enjoyment struggle. And I think I said somewhere, the right has, I use a sports metaphor, has a home field advantage when it comes to enjoyment, because I think the structure of the right's enjoyment is precisely that you enjoy through the figure that's excluded, right? So you have to have a figure of exclusion, and then you feel like, oh, I have my enjoyment because that person, we're aligned through that figure of exclusion. But the enjoyment actually occurs through the figure that's excluded. So it depends upon the outsider that is being excluded. The enjoyment of the left, I think, or universal enjoyment, the enjoyment of non-belonging, is interestingly it's through the same figure. But it's rather than it's a ostracism of that figure, it's an identification with that figure. So I think that in a way, you could say both kinds of enjoyment are really the same, but it's just, where do you line yourself up? Are you trying to say, oh no, I'm part of this who's not subject to the horrors of non-belonging, or no, I'm there with the figure of non-belonging. So my dad was a total conservative, rabid conservative guy, right? And totally I know this is going to seem barbaric to you because you're European, but he was completely for the death penalty. Just thought, these killers, we got to get rid of them. And so then there was a serial killer named Ted Bundy. Maybe you've heard of him. He was on the loose for a while, and he got caught. He spent a number of years in jail, and finally he was executed. This is early 90s, a few years before my dad died. And when he got executed, not everyone, but a lot of people, there was all this cheering outside the death house, and everyone is and there are pictures of it. And my dad came home to me, and I already had a leftist conversion, and he knew that I was gone to the dark side. But he said to me, he's like, he goes, I'm never going to be for the death penalty again, because I saw what upset him was that enjoyment of those, just incredible enjoyment of those people that required this one person being executed. And at that moment, what happened in him was he shifted. Like all of a sudden, he obviously didn't align himself with everything about Ted Bundy, like killing people, killing young women. But he aligned himself insofar as he was being executed with that figure of non-belonging. And then all of a sudden he could no longer experience that enjoyment of that group. And so I just thought it was a fascinating moment at which you saw someone. You almost never see this, right? Political shifts usually happen very gradually, or someone reads a book or something. I don't know what happens to them. They take one of your classes, maybe. I don't know. Something happens, but I saw it happen in a matter of 10 minutes. So it was an incredible moment. But I think that seemed to me to encapsulate precisely this difference between forms of enjoyment.
There seems to be a specific kind of disorientation to these forms of enjoyments, or linked to the forms of enjoyment. I mean, just because one enjoys that which one hates, right? I mean, just like in the classical sense, one loves the villain that one hates, right? I don't know, James Bond movies that I don't particularly enjoy are quite good at those mobilizations.
Well, even Hitchcock, right, Frank? The villain makes the picture. That's what he said.
Exactly.
The villain makes the picture.
No, exactly. And that means the love to, like, loving to hate someone is a reflexive reaction to these kinds of things. But the disgusts, maybe disgust is a form of enjoyment that describes it, with like the ice raids.
Yeah.
Brings that to another level. I mean, I was thinking when just, I mean, I'm just improvising for a moment now. I was thinking when listening to you earlier of Victor Klemperer, who wrote this Lingua Tertii Imperi, like the language of the Third Reich. And he writes this little, I don't know, companion of minimal changes in daily activities during the implementation of the Third Reich. And he's just appalled how, I don't know, certain words are repurposed, but he also finds it fascinating. One can see that there is a fascination with, I don't know, how it attracts, I don't know, not simply attention, but how it actually works. And that must have a bearing on this very disorientating, I don't know, rejigging of the right, so to speak, right now speaking the rhetoric of the former left, right, against the state, against the deep state, against, I don't know, giving power back to the people, being the, I don't know, populist party.
Against the elites.
Exactly, against the elites, right? So taking power as an act of, I don't know, not taking power, of bringing someone else into power. And on the other hand side, the attempt to minimally, I don't know, stabilize the situation by saying, let's salvage wood, let's defend the existing welfare states, let's introduce minimal rules into how we talk to one another, ethical codes, and so forth. So, I mean, Zizek has this line, obviously, to say that the right took everything from, not even from the left, but I think one could say from left fantasies, right? From the fantasies of the lefts. It was a disappropriation of left fantasies They stormed the capital, right? They stormed the seat of power. They speak vulgarly in power. They did what the others dreamt about, and therefore, almost like in a continuation from 68, they try to prove that perverts go to the ends, and the hysterics just dream about it, right? The hysterics just think, well, yeah, no, it's not this, not this. But no, the perverts just go to the end. What does one do with such a weird conjuncture?
Yeah. Okay. Do you think, I got a question for you then. Do you think the left was hysterical or was perverse? So I'll just give you a little background on why I asked that question. So I'm going to teach a class called The Musical and Social Unrest in the fall. And so I'm watching a ton of musicals. So one that I watched was Hair. I don't know if you know this, the Hair. Yeah. Okay. At least you know of it, right? And I found it kind of like Hillary, my spouse, joked. She's like, "You hate the '60s, so you would have hated that. You just hate that whole culture." But I basically hated it, and I thought those guys, they're right wingers. Like the fact that one of them ends up going off to the Vietnam War, it's an accident. But I just thought like they're not. So the question is, I guess my question for you is, I think they really are perverse. I think those leftists really were perverse. And I think, I guess, and I'm really curious what both of you would say about this, but because I think that it never really was a leftist position. That perversion, and I think there was this grave error on the left to think, and this comes back to our first thing about Slavoj and provocation versus perversion, and to think that perversion was a viable or even an emancipatory or a leftist political strategy. And I think a lot of people thought that it was. And I think especially, the 68, a lot of the energy of the 68 revolt was a perverse revolt. So I hear you, and I know that this is one of Slavoj's claims that the right has taken over but my sense is I don't think that was ever leftist. I think it was all really a deeply reactionary movement in the guise of a challenge. Okay, it was a challenge to the existing order or whatever, but it wasn't a leftist challenge to the existing order, in my view.
But wasn't the, I mean, the way I understood this claim to run would be to say the idea en jouir sans entrave, right? To enjoy without boundaries whatsoever.
They went even farther, Frank. They were like, we were going to fuck our mothers, right? It was
I know people involved in this shit. Yeah, but that is clear-cut perversion, yes. But that means that 68 marks the shift where perversion is recoded in a certain way as being socially transformative in such a way that the permanent, I don't know, challenging of authority that is hysterical is then identified not to be. So, and that shift itself does something to the very challenging of authority, because the very challenging then of authority can, after the private shift, become part of authority.
Part of the way authority works.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
No, totally agree.
So it's not simply a move from hysteria to perversion, right? Or a harsh overtaking of perversion over hysteria. It is the perversion of hysteria itself.
No, I think you're exactly right, and I think that I mean, I think you could say that we're living in the aftermath of that disaster, right? Like that. I mean, we're like living out that disaster, and I think yeah, I just think that really that political shift really just changed. I mean, I wonder, I guess my question would be, what was the no, I think you're right. I don't have that question. I think I think it's really good. I think it's right. And I think uh I I wonder if I guess maybe the left always should have been on the side of the state. That's what I mean, that's kind of what I think, right? Like I think I've always thought the worst. I think the book is pretty well written and all the worse for it, but I think one of the worst disasters was this origins of totalitarianism, right? Because it's too bad that Slavoj's book, what's the book called? What's so scary about totalitarianism, or what? I forget. It's something like that. But it's the problem is it kind of goes in a lot of different directions. But basically, the idea there is so great because I think it's fundamentally a critique of Arendt, and I think that she is the one who says what totalitarianism does is it for one thing, she doesn't invent the word, but she basically invents it. She makes it popular. That it brings it increases the power of the state, and I don't think that's the danger, I guess. And I think what's interesting is the authoritarian regimes. Don't you think it's fascinating that there's always some kind of supplementary structure next to the state, right? Like for Nazis and communism, it's a party or whatever. Like they can't. Like there's something about the state that sort of is a problem for capital. I think it's not just a tool of capital. I'm firmly convinced about this, and I think it's also a problem for these reactionary movements. That the state, there's something about it. They want to destroy it. They don't want to. They don't want to take it over. And I think it's even evident today in many of these movements. So I don't, so that's part of my feeling. And it's a very Hegelian idea, I know, to think that the state can be a rampart against capital. But that's sort of that's my version of, that's my leftism. And so that's why I think that should have always been, that defending the state should have always been, obviously not the wars of the state or whatever, but some defense of the state should have always been what the left was doing, in my view.
But I think this is also Slavoj's thesis in one of the, where does he say this? In the idea of communism series. In one of them, he says, I'm paraphrasing because I cannot, I don't have the exact quote, but he says, if you don't know what to replace the state with, you should basically take over the state, and until you realize what will replace the state, you should stick to it. Because I think his critique, at least if I remember correctly, and both of you can correct me, is that if you just take the position of being anti-state, you're in a beautiful soul position. So to
yeah. No, that is his point. Yeah.
Speaking of which, we have come to the end, but we always end this with our podcast with a series of either/or questions.
This is like the Bernard Pivot questionnaire.
Yeah. Well, so Todd, the first one.
Hegel, what do you want God to say when you get to the pearly?
I mean, you can elaborate on your choice. You can dismiss it altogether, and all of it. All right. So Hegel or Lacan?
Hegel, no question. I think I've already told you that.
Yeah.
Hegel's for me. So I have a little funny. I'm going to elaborate a Hegel anecdote, and I just found this out in this incredible book called, I think it's really good. Maybe both of you know it, called Hegel's Welt. It's by this guy Jürgen Kalbe, and he tells us note that Goethe writes this letter to Schiller, and he says, this Hegel's a great guy, incredible thinker, but he's just a terrible writer. Can you think we can help him? And Schiller says, there's a guy I know who's a kind of younger guy, needs a little help training in philosophy. Let's have Hegel see if he can simplify his ideas and just explain them to this guy. But it never came off. And so I thought that was, so he's incredibly, he's a very bad writer, but I just think I think there's never been a thinker like him, because I think what he did was, I think he's personally very admirable. But I also think what he did was he managed to see that we can construct a system without a first principle. And I think that no one else had thought that. So Hegel. Sorry, that was long-winded.
Yeah, that doesn't come as a surprise. All right, the second one, Spike Lee or David Lynch?
Wow, man, you're really so the question is, I'm just talking to myself. The question is it longevity or is it great hits, right? So I think I'm going to say Lynch because there's fewer. Spike Lee has a lot of failure. So I'm going to say Lynch has less failures. So I think there's only one genuine failure in the Lynch oeuvre. So I think I'm going to say
Which
Lynch.
would that be?
Inland Empire.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Good. We agree. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Fincher or Cronenberg?
Wow. So if you would have asked me this in 1999, I would have said Fincher, no question. I think he actually should have. I don't want to be too mean. He shouldn't have killed himself, but he should have made Fight Club and then retired. So I think everything after is bad.
Agreed.
But everything before is great. So it's his Alien 3 is wildly underrated even by him. And then 7 and then Fight Club, just incredible. Okay. So it has to be Cronenberg. Because Cronenberg, there's a lot of great things. So and I don't know if any filmmaker reinvented himself in the way like that the Viggo Mortensen series of is Dangerous Method first, maybe it is, and then History of Violence, and then Eastern Promises, or maybe the order is wrong. But he did those 3 in a row, and they're very non-Cronenberg-like films, and then he goes back to making Cronenberg-type films. So it's pretty incredible, I think. Yeah, so Cronenberg, even the early. Plus, he also brought Marilyn Chambers into the mainstream in Rabid. So Rabid's a very good film too, I think. So yeah, yeah.
Drive or Desire?
Drive. I'm just going to answer and we'll go on. Drive.
Monarchy or democracy?
Okay, that's a trick question because
it is.
Democracy. I'm gonna synthesize this because I want a constitutional monarchy with it. Yeah.
Streaming or cinema?
Oh, cinema. No question. No question. I think streaming should be banned. I think we should still have to order the DVDs to come to our house. And yeah, totally. Or reopen video stores. Streaming has been the worst thing in human history, I think. I mean, Holocaust streaming.
Movies or TV series?
Oh, okay. So with relationships, I like a long-term, stable spouse. With my movie entertainment, I like a one-night stand. So it has to be so I do not like the idea of a series you have to commit. Right now, one of my sons has me watching this Star Wars one that everyone loves. What's it called?
I've never seen it.
I don't know.
I don't think I should. Yeah.
It's by the guy that did Michael Clayton. So it's a series. Anyway.
I detest Star Wars, I must say. I'm sorry.
What is it, Frank?
I detest Star Wars, I must say.
No, I do too, but this is not, you don't have to know anything about Star Wars. It's just.
I know. I mean, that's part of
it. I don't know. I should. Everyone's told me to watch it, so I'm watching it. But before that, I watched that Keira Knightley one, The Doves. Did you see that? That wasn't good. So I haven't seen a good thing in a while. But you're gonna anyway. Sorry, I'm taking too long. Either or.
No. This is perfect. No, well, we have 2 more left. Succession of Breaking Bad or Breaking Bad.
That's a tough choice because I don't like either because don't you feel? That's a serious question for the 2 of you. Don't you feel like you need someone to like to really love a series? Like Mad Men, you basically like everyone, and Better Call Saul, you love Kim, you love Breaking Bad, you hate everybody. Succession is hate everyone even worse. So I would say Breaking Bad just because at times I like Jesse, and I do think there are certain things about Breaking Bad. I think here's one of my ideas is that every series, almost all the great series, go on too long. And so I think Breaking Bad, if it ended when Hank found the poems on the toilet, and then just cut and that was the end, that would have been great. But Breaking Bad, I guess. I don't know. I hate Walt so much. It's hard for me to like it. Yeah.
And the very last one, capitalism or techno-feudalism?
Capitalism. I'm totally against this neo-feudalist thesis. So I'm sorry to my friend Jody Dean. I don't know Varoufakis, so I don't have to apologize to him. But to Jody, I'm really sorry. But I just do not. I just think we're just still. I understand the impulse to constantly create new terms, but I think it's also not a great impulse. Like, I don't even like neoliberalism. I just think we're still in a liberal era. Like let's like we don't need a new term for everything. Anyway, so capitalism.
It was great.
Todd, thank you so much for this. It was really great. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and sorry for blabbering on so long. It was
Not
really
at all.
It was
Wonderful.
It was amazing.
We stay in touch as always.
great.
Much appreciated.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.